Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. Hundreds of millions of people get their flu shots every fall. But what if the immunity the vaccine gives you lasted longer than a year? Duke University scientists are trying to develop a new flu vaccine that could last years. This week, new research showed it may also be more effective than the one we have now. WRAL health reporter Grace Hayba is here to talk about this research. Grace, thanks for being here.
Of course, happy to be here.
So, okay, I know you've been talking about this for a little while now, so catch us up to speed on this universal flu vaccine that researchers are working on.
Yeah, so the whole idea of it is essentially just what you hit on. Instead of every single flu season, we have to book a trip, go to the pharmacy, take the kids, get your flu doses, and then essentially hope that the prediction scientists made 6, 7, 8 months earlier turns out to be accurate, and the flu shot that you just got ends up being effective against whichever strain circulates that year. Sometimes those predictions are right, sometimes they're not. They do their best guess, but we all know viruses mutate, and you just can't roll out a vaccine in a day and get it into hundreds of thousands of people's arms, right? So all of that has to be done well in advance, hence the idea of a universal flu vaccine that instead of trying to predict and target one strain would provide protection against all of them. That way, if the prediction isn't right, it doesn't really matter because you're already protected.
Okay, and so there's a group of researchers looking at that. What is this newest research that we found out about this week show about the effectiveness?
Yes, so this is really fascinating. There's a team of researchers with Duke. I talked with the lead researcher, Nicholas Heaton, who explained that they essentially found, or rather honed in on this protein called hemagglutinin. And I know that term probably doesn't mean anything to a lot of us. I had to do my own research and ask him a ton of questions too. But it's essentially the protein that allows the flu virus to get inside the cells of our body and then in turn make us sick.
So when you breathe it into your nose, the virus encounters a cell that it needs to get into and infect so it can replicate. The hemagglutinin is the protein on that virus that binds. It's also the protein that the immune system sees to try and make antibodies, because if you can get antibodies to bind that hemagglutinin protein, it blocks it and stops it from being able to grab onto a host cell and infect it. So that's really the major target if you're trying to elicit an immune response to stop the virus from doing what it wants to do. That's the one that you target.
So their goal was to look at that protein and say, hey, is there a way that we could make a vaccine that would keep your body from accepting this flu virus into our system, thereby making your immune system's response stronger to not just one strain, but all of the strains? And so I kind of referred to it as a broccoli shape. That's kind of the best way to visualize what this protein looks like. And so instead of the virus being able, or rather the flu shot being able to target the crown or the head of the broccoli, they're trying to make a vaccine that would target the stalks, because those pretty much stay the same regardless of how many florets are on the top of your broccoli that you get at the grocery store. The stalks pretty much stay the same. So that's their ultimate goal with this new research that was just announced this week.
Okay, and what's the differences between that and what you were covering earlier this year?
Yeah, so earlier this year, I spoke with another team of researchers also at Duke with the same end goal of creating a vaccine that would provide broader and longer-lasting protection. This, though, was led by Garnett Kelso and his team and his lab there at Duke. They also partnered with researchers at Harvard as well, and they essentially looked at antibodies within humans to see if there's an antibody that maybe we already have or that we're already familiar with that essentially responds to several different types of flu.
If it's possible, make an antibody that would bind to all sorts of flus, not just the flu of the season. We found in humans, it was 2 antibodies out of about 8,000 that bound to all sorts of different kinds of flu.
So if you're able to target that antibody and basically convince your body to replicate that, then maybe there's a way that we could fight off flu in that sense, again, with the same goal of targeting multiple strains.
Okay. It sounds like we got 2 different options here that
Yes.
folks are working on.
Yes.
Okay, let's take a quick break right there, and we'll be right back. Okay, so Grace, before the break, you were talking about two main ways that researchers at Duke are talking about trying to get to this universal flu vaccine. So do researchers know how often we would need to get these shots if they are able to get to that point?
Yeah, so that would be the really awesome part about all of this is if everything goes according to plan, instead of having to make those trips every single flu season, you could go a couple years, maybe 3 years, maybe even 5 or longer. That's ultimately the goal, because the issue right now is not that the flu vaccine that you go and get every fall necessarily doesn't still protect you a year from then when the next flu season comes around, but rather the strain that you went and got doesn't circulate right now. So it doesn't matter because the vaccine that you got just simply isn't effective.
These viruses, like coronaviruses, live in animals. And they're mutating and reassorting and doing their things, at least in the case of flu. And so you also have this major, major challenge of we don't even know what's out there, what's coming. And so it's hard to kind of predict and make sure your vaccine will work against everything that could be coming in the future, as opposed to these viruses, which only live in people. We have a pretty good grasp on where they are and what they are.
The protection itself against that one strain does last, but that's not the strain that may be circulating in your office space or your kid's classroom. So that's the whole goal, is to make one shot that you could get once every couple of years that would protect you against a much broader array of strains.
Got it. So it kind of, I know we talked about the broccoli metaphor, but another metaphor with this sounds like it would be like an umbrella.
Exactly.
Towards all these different droplets of flu strains. Okay. So how far out do these scientists think we are from getting this new flu shot?
It still looks like it's going to be at least a couple of years. Like we talked about, we've kind of mentioned two different ongoing processes right now to try to reach that end goal. And there's several other people, also working on things like this too. So I think realistically, we're going to see this happen at some point. It's just a matter of who's first and what method did they use. These two ongoing research projects at Duke do show really promising results. The one in January that I initially reported on and this one that was just announced this week both showed
you can give the mice hugely lethal doses of influenza virus, and the mice survive. In fact, they don't get very sick at all.
Their lung capacities are far better than the mice who were even injected with current flu strains, and especially compared to mice who were injected with something that wasn't going to protect them at all as the control group. So based on that, it does show that there is hope and it is promising. But having said that, there's still many hurdles to go through. That was one of the things Nicholas Heaton kind of emphasized.
Yeah, it's super exciting. The reality is that for people who do this type of work, at the beginning, you have an idea. Hey, maybe this would work. And 9 out of 10 of them don't. So when you find one that looks good, at least in the systems you're using, it's very exciting. But with that said, on the path to getting this to being a good vaccine that's helping people, we're still on maybe step 3 out of 10 or something.
And he guessed that it would probably be about 10 years from now for this current research that was announced this week to potentially evolve into a real vaccine in humans. And again, that's entirely dependent on if these tests continue to prove that this experimental vaccine is effective in mice and eventually primates. And Kelso also mentioned that they hope to move on within the next 2 years from testing in mice on primates as well. So who knows? Maybe we'll be back here, a couple of years from now talking about the evolution of these vaccines. But it does look promising.
Gotcha. And how important is this when we talk about flu season, the importance of getting your flu shot? Potentially the changes that it could make, and just in the meantime,
Yeah.
I feel like we say this every year. Now's not normally the time we say it, but we'll say it. Important to get your flu shot, right?
Yeah. Hey, you can still get the flu now, right?
Right.
It happens.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely still important because even though the predictions may or may not be accurate, some protection is better than no protection. It just always is. And so, especially here in the Triangle, the last time I was on here, we were talking about overwhelmed hospital systems, right? It's something that our area especially feels the burden of every single influenza and respiratory virus season. So getting your flu shot is so important. So make sure that you still make those appointments because, again, this is still a couple years off. We're hopeful, but everything has to go according to plan. And until then, we have very good and effective vaccines out there that, everybody should still be going and getting.
Right. It's just a matter of maybe once these come out, you won't have to go every year.
Exactly.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much, Grace. We appreciate you coming by, and thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email that's waiting in your inbox every morning with local news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.